Hey guys, tonight we step into shadows that stretch across crumbling stone and sharp-angled walls, the kind of shapes that make your eyes question whether you're in a medieval fortress or a sci-fi film set. You're standing before one of the strangest architectural puzzles of all time, the Star Fortress. Its points jut outward like frozen lightning. Its geometry so precise that even your phone's camera feels like it's trembling just to capture it. It looks military, sure, something meant to deflect cannonballs. But the more you stare, the more it feels like something else, something beyond the practical. Maybe an engineer's fever dream, or maybe, just maybe, a relic of a technology that shouldn't exist in the time it was built. You run your hand along the cold wall, half expecting it to buzz. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you think, you probably won't survive this kind of curiosity if the walls really are alive.so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It always blows my mind seeing where people are tuning in from and when. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, crunching gravel underfoot. As the last streaks of daylight fade, the fortress rises taller with every step, its bastions stretching like arms that refuse to let enemies approach. Ordinary castles wear turrets like crowns, but these fortresses? They wear geometry, perfect and impossible. They're laid out like giant snowflakes stamped into the earth. From above, thanks, modern drone footage, they look less like forts and more like circuit boards. Historians will tell you these emerged in the 15th and 16th centuries, right when gunpowder was rewriting the rules of war. Cannons destroyed. Old medieval walls like kids kicking sandcastles, so fortresses needed sharper, angled designs to scatter the force. That's the official story. And yes, it's true. Bastions did deflect cannon fire better. But here's the fringe whisper. What if those angles weren't just for ballistics? What if they were meant for energy? Resonance? Something we don't even teach in engineering class today. Historians still argue whether builders stumbled onto advanced geometry by trial and error, or whether someone, or something, handed down a knowledge set far ahead of its time. You trace one point of the star with your eyes, following its crisp line that stretches hundreds of feet. Too crisp, too neat. You'd almost believe a laser cutter was at work here. A chill breeze rattles across your neck, as if the fortress just exhaled. You think of other lost technologies, Roman concrete that refuses to crumble, Greek fire no one can recreate, or those Viking sunstones that could find the sun on a cloudy day. Maybe this fortress belongs in that same category, things we shouldn't have lost, but did. Or maybe we never understood them in the first place. You shuffle into the outer trench, once filled with water. The ditch encircles the walls like a moat designed not for storybook nights, but for strategists who thought in equations. Some forts are so vast they swallow entire towns inside. You imagine soldiers here centuries ago, standing with muskets, probably bored out of their minds, never realizing their barracks sat atop a puzzle that future generations would obsess over. You laugh softly at the thought, like renting a room in the Louvre and complaining about the plumbing. Point one mainstream fact you can't ignore: these forts weren't rare. There are hundreds across Europe, from Italy to the Netherlands, and even across continents: India, Africa, the Americas. The patterns spread like wildfire. That's where things get weird. How did nearly identical designs appear in places separated by oceans? Engineers insist it's just the spread of military necessity. Conspiracy hunters mutter, Tartaria, a lost empire whose fingerprints are scattered worldwide. You're left in the middle, brushing moss off your fingers and asking why. If this is just practical architecture, it looks so otherworldly. The fortress looms silent above you now. You step closer, the stones glowing faintly under the moonlight. And for just a moment you feel like the walls are leaning in, whispering a secret older than cannonballs. You know this is only the beginning, that each step inside will peel back more layers of mystery, more signs that the technology of these star fortresses might have been something far beyond defense. Something cutting edge, even now. You slip through the arched gateway, the iron hinges long gone, replaced by shadows that stretch into the belly of the star. The courtyard opens wide, its symmetry so deliberate that your body almost wants to walk in perfect triangles. The walls around you jut forward in arrow-like bastions, and each point feels less like masonry and more like a blade aimed at the horizon. You pause, squinting along one of those knife-edged walls, imagining what it must have been like to stand here while cannon smoke thickened the air. The official explanation is simple. Those angled bastions were designed to deflect artillery. Straight medieval walls had been the Achilles heel of every fortress. Once gunpowder made its entrance, tall towers and curtain walls might as well have been dominoes. By flattening and angling the walls, cannonballs were forced to ricochet, losing energy instead of blasting straight through. Historians point out that this innovation, sometimes called the trace italienne, began in Renaissance Italy and spread across Europe as the must-have military architecture of the 16th century. Think of it as the military equivalent of the iPhone. Once someone saw it, everyone else had to copy. Yet, as you run your hand along the sloping rampart, you can't help but feel like the story doesn't quite add up. The angles aren't just clever, they're obsessive. The precision suggests calculations beyond rough battlefield necessity. Fringe researchers whisper that these bastions didn't just scatter cannon fire, they scattered energy itself. Theories range from electromagnetic dispersal to sound wave manipulation. It sounds wild, but as your boots crunch along gravel, you admit, the idea of a fortress doubling as a giant tuning fork has a strange appeal. You chuckle at yourself. A fortress as a tuning fork? Next thing you know, you'll be insisting the cafeteria served zero-gravity soup. Still, the geometry nags at you. The more you study it, the more the star's points look like mathematical diagrams. Each bastion is positioned so that no blind spot exists. Defenders could crossfire at anyone approaching. Practical, yes, but it also creates repeating fractals of geometry that feel almost digital. And you're left wondering, was the canon story a neat cover, while something deeper hid in plain sight? Historians still argue whether these designs emerged naturally from necessity, or whether some forgotten text, some set of plans from an earlier culture, seeded the idea. You recall the fact that engineers like Michelangelo himself once dabbled in fortification design, sketching out angled walls to resist cannon fire. But how far did genius really go? Did it leap centuries ahead, or did it tap into an older stream of knowledge nobody wanted to acknowledge? Your fingers trace a groove in the stone, not deep enough to be erosion, too straight to be accidental. Was it cut as a measure? A marker? You picture soldiers leaning on muskets, staring at the same line, and thinking only about how many hours till supper, never realizing it might encode something cosmic. That's the quirky part. You're standing in the middle of a battlefield, calculator and a mystery novel at the same time. The wind howls through one of the bastions, a hollow moan that ricochets around like a cannonball of air. You laugh nervously. Maybe the builders designed the wind's trajectory too. It wouldn't be the first time human architecture doubled as environmental manipulation. After all, ancient amphitheaters were built so whispering voices could be heard hundreds of feet away. Why not forts that hum in the breeze like a warning system? You take a few more steps, boots echoing against stone so hard it still feels new centuries later. The fortress sprawls outward, each bastion pointing like a compass needle, as though daring you to follow. You realize this is the rhythm of these places, practical on the surface, unsettling underneath. Maybe that's why, even today, pilots looking down at satellite images feel a shiver. They're not looking at old war defenses, they're staring at a riddle etched into the earth itself. Point one angled wall, one cannonball ricochet, one soldier. Too bored to care. And you, standing here centuries later, care perhaps too much. The air shifts as you move deeper, and suddenly the fortress feels less like open geometry and more like a cave system pretending to be a military outpost. You duck through a low archway, the stone damp under your fingertips, and descend into darkness that smells of wet earth and lime. Your footsteps echo down a narrow passage, and the silence around you grows heavy, thick, like wool. You're not just inside walls anymore. You're in the underworld of the fortress, where rumors whisper of secret technology long buried. Mainstream historians say these tunnels were storage areas, powder magazines, or escape routes. Functional, utilitarian, nothing fancy. But as your hands brush along the curved ceilings, You notice how carefully the vaults are shaped. They aren't crude digs hacked out for gunpowder barrels. They're deliberate, symmetrical, and acoustically tuned, like someone wanted sound to travel perfectly along them. You stop. Clap your hands. The echo doesn't fade, it runs like a river, curling down the passage before returning in a strange double beat. A little too crisp. You grin nervously and mutter, "Well, that's not creepy at all." You half expect a ghostly tour guide to applaud back. Quirky detail. In some fortresses, entire underground cities existed. At Naarden in the Netherlands, there are reports of basements, casemates, and vaulted galleries stretching out like spider webs. Some were so extensive that locals joked you could walk underground for hours and never touch the same stone twice. Imagine being stationed there, dragging your musket along, trying not to get lost before breakfast. But here's where debate creeps in. Historians still argue whether these labyrinths were purely defensive or if some served ritualistic or experimental purposes. Fringe researchers lean into the idea that these underground vaults weren't for soldiers at all, but for machines. Lost engines, power sources, maybe something humming underfoot that fed energy into the fortress above. It's out there, sure, but as your boots crunch against the fine gravel, you can't ignore how polished the design feels. Less like a bunker, more like a battery case. You crouch near a corner where brick meets stone in an awkward seam. A draft brushes your face, too cold for the season. Somewhere behind the wall, a hidden corridor breathes. You press your ear close, listening, and the wall seems to vibrate faintly, like the heartbeat of a giant sleeping machine. Of course, it could just be wind. It usually is wind. And yet, you can't shake the thought. Maybe this fortress was designed to inhale and exhale, a stone lung regulating the underground atmosphere. The torchlight in your imagination flickers, bouncing shadows across damp walls. You picture soldiers huddled down here during bombardments, muttering prayers, scratching graffiti on the stone. Maybe one drew crude jokes about the officers upstairs. Maybe another, more desperate, carved cryptic patterns, circles, spirals, stars, that modern graffiti hunters now swear are clues. People still debate whether these markings were doodles, symbols of resistance, or instructions for something else. You keep moving, deeper still, following the air current. The passage opens suddenly into a vaulted chamber so tall it makes you crane your neck. The ceiling arches like a cathedral turned inside out, ribs of stone stretching upward. You whisper just to test it, and your voice booms back tenfold, like the fortress itself is mocking you. For a moment you imagine this wasn't a chamber for storage, but for ceremony, or maybe calibration. You remember how Roman aqueducts carried water for miles, how Egyptian tombs aligned with the stars, how medieval cathedrals doubled as giant sundials. Human architecture always hides two purposes, the obvious one and the hidden one. Why not here too? A drip of water lands on your shoulder, snapping you out of your spiral. You laugh quietly, shaking your head. Maybe the only hidden tech here is ancient waterproofing that failed centuries ago. Still, as you turn toward the exit tunnel, you can't help thinking that these underground labyrinths were designed to do more than just keep gunpowder dry. They were designed to make you feel something, small, lost, and in the presence of a secret too big for daylight. You climb back toward the surface, the echo of your steps chasing you like whispers refusing to let go. You emerge from the labyrinth with the odd sensation that the fortress hasn't let you go, it's only shifted the stage. The open courtyard now feels like a giant amphitheater, and the moment you whisper under your breath, you notice how far your words travel. You tilt your head, test it again, and the sound bounces off angled walls with a precision that feels less like coincidence and more like design. Mainstream fact first, fortresses like these were engineered not just for walls, but for voices. Commanders needed to shout orders across wide courtyards, over the thunder of muskets, and through the chaos of battle. Engineers shaped corridors and bastions so sound would travel in controlled ways. The military called it practical. You call it eerie because, here's the thing, you cough, clear your throat, and notice how the smallest noise flutters down the wall like a bird. One whisper here, another whisper there, and suddenly you've got an intercom system long before electricity. Historians still argue whether this was deliberate acoustic engineering or just a lucky byproduct of all those sharp angles and arches. Yet, as you walk slowly along the wall, your footsteps clicking like drum beats, you can't shake the feeling that someone meant this. You remember a quirky detail. In the Venetian fortresses of Palmanova, tourists claim that if you stand at one star point and speak softly, your voice can be heard almost word for word in a bastion hundreds of feet away. Locals joke it's like medieval Bluetooth. You smirk. Bluetooth may drain your phone battery, but at least it doesn't demand a half-mile stroll through mossy trenches. You pause at a corner, lean into the wall, and murmur a nonsense phrase, "Banana pancakes forever." To your surprise, the echo curls back in perfect clarity. It's as though the fortress itself has opinions about breakfast. You laugh quietly, realizing you might be the first person in history to use Tartarian Star Fort technology for comedy. Still, the more you test the acoustics, the more unsettling it becomes. Vibrations don't just bounce. They stretch, ripple, and sometimes even converge. A murmur here becomes a strange chorus there. Imagine soldiers long ago, able to relay signals without bugles or flags, simply by whispering. It would have been efficient and invisible to the enemy. You wander toward a bastion, and the wind joins the game. It whistles along the angled stones in a pitch so steady it almost forms a note. You press your ear against the wall, and suddenly the stone hums faintly, low, persistent, like a bass line beneath a song you can't fully hear. You half expect the fortress to burst into opera. Instead, it simply reminds you that stone isn't silent. It remembers every word, every vibration. Historians will point to amphitheaters and whispering galleries, like St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where voices carry perfectly across domes. But the Star Fort does it with brutal geometry, all sharp points and echoing cuts. You wonder aloud if maybe, just maybe, these forts weren't just for deflecting cannonballs. Maybe they were for transmitting something. Sound, vibration, even energy. Of course, skeptics laugh that off. They say, these echoes are just the side effect of large, hollow chambers. Nothing more. And maybe they're right. Maybe you're standing here talking to yourself in a centuries-old megaphone. But then again, why does it work so well? Why does it feel so tuned? You walk back across the courtyard, your own steps sounding like a drumline practicing for a parade. Every click of your boot is crisp, almost musical. You mutter, if these walls ever start singing back, I'm out. Nothing answers, thankfully. Still, you leave the courtyard with the awareness that the fortress isn't silent. It's a vast instrument, and tonight, you're the one plucking its strings. The fortress doesn't just hold secrets in the air, it hides them in the water too. You follow the curve of the wall until you come across a shallow depression where weeds sway gently. Once, this was a reservoir. You kneel beside the cracked stone edge, brush away moss, and see a channel leading into darkness. The builders weren't satisfied with moats alone. They crafted entire hydraulic systems that rival anything you'd expect in a modern city. Mainstream fact, many star forts had intricate water defenses. Engineers diverted rivers, carved canals, and constructed sluices that could flood ditches at will. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It meant attackers had to wade through waist-deep water before even touching the walls. The 17th century. Dutch were especially famous for this, using their landscape of rivers and marshes as part of the fortification system. They could literally turn their fields into seas at the pull of a gate. But you notice more. As you follow the channel, you find basins shaped too carefully, pipes carved from stone, and even remnants of fountains that once gushed right in the fortress heart. Fringe voices whisper that these weren't only for drinking or defense. They were part of an advanced plumbing system lost to time. Standing here, staring at channels that still carry trickles of rain centuries later, you wonder, were these fortresses water fortresses, or were they water machines? A quirky detail. At Fort Bourtange in the Netherlands, the star moat system is so elegant that modern visitors assume it's a kind of decorative garden. In truth, the entire layout could flood or drain in hours, leaving enemies baffled. You chuckle imagining an invading army wading in, only to find themselves stuck knee-deep like frustrated toddlers at a water park. Historians still argue whether the waterworks were purely military or whether they doubled as civic infrastructure. After all, many forts eventually turned into towns. Did soldiers drink from these cisterns? Did bakers fill their ovens with fortress water? Or was it all meant for something more secretive, an energy flow, a way to channel not just water but force? You step closer to a vaulted cistern and whisper into its mouth. The echo is long, hollow, and strangely musical, as though the water was once part of the fortress's acoustic system too. Your shoes crunch on damp gravel as you lean over. A covered well. The air rising out is cool and steady, far cooler than the night around you. A draft so measured it feels designed. You close your eyes and imagine soldiers lowering buckets here, unaware they were drawing from a system calibrated like an underground organ. The stone under your palm is slick with condensation, proof that even now the fortress drinks and exhales. You think of modern plumbing, pipes that rattle in apartments, showers that squeak, and you laugh softly. 5 centuries ago, here in the shadow of Star Points, someone built plumbing that not only worked but still whispers today. You straighten, brush your palms on your trousers, and look back at the moat. The water gleams under moonlight like a mirror, circling the fortress in perfect geometry. It doesn't just defend, it reflects. And as you watch, the fortress seems to float, as though it were built not on land but on the surface of a quiet black sea. You mutter, half serious, half joking. If this place suddenly sprouts a hot tub, I'm staying forever. No hot tub appears, just ripples across the moat, spreading in silent concentric circles, as if answering your thought in water instead of words. Asterisk, you follow the moat's mirrored edge until the path kinks toward another bastion, and here, you stop. The hair on. Your arms lifts as if the night itself has static. You fish a tiny compass from your pocket, more novelty keychain than survival gear, and hold it flat on your palm. The needle glides north, then hesitates, then, nope, decides to try salsa. It spins, slows, shudders, points at the bastion, points at your shoe, then points firmly at absolutely nothing. If your phone compass behaved like this, you'd reboot the universe. You take a few steps left. The needle behaves. A few steps right. The needle throws a tantrum again. You pace in a slow grid like a surveyor on decoff, mapping a patch where the compass goes rogue. The fortress feels amused, as if it's watching you play hot and cold with a ghostly magnet. Mainstream fact: compasses misbehave around iron. Early modern soldiers knew this. 17th century navigators documented variation and deviation. And by 1700 Edmund Halley was literally charting magnetic declination for the Atlantic. Put enough iron, cannons, nails, hinges, rails, into one place and your needle starts gossiping instead of guiding. Many star forts were packed with iron hardware and stored artillery, so a jittery compass near a rampart isn't exactly supernatural. Still, this patch is odd. There's no iron left in sight, just stone glimmering in moonlight and a curtain of ivy. You kneel and study the masonry. A seam of darker rock runs through the bastion like a vein. Basalt? Magnetite-rich stone? Lightning, over centuries, can magnetize rock in unpredictable ways. You picture a summer storm beating this bastion with thunderbolts until the wall learned a new trick. It's a comforting thought, electricity class, not eldritch tech, but the compass keeps doing pirouettes, and you can't help how your brain whispers, designed. You test another spot, and the needle snaps toward a subterranean angle, straight at the tunnel you walked earlier. You grin. Of course it does. The fortress has layers that talk to each other. Water below, angles above, a whispering courtyard, and now a magnetic shrug. You quip, softly. North called. She's taking a personal day. The wind answers with a very professional side out. A quirky tidbit surfaces from the rumor's soup. Some 19th century travelers wrote about lodestone walls, swearing that certain forts could tug at knives or make compass needles tremble from yards away. Were they exaggerating? Probably. But then you remember the way blacksmiths once stroked blades with lodestone to give them a weak magnetism, and you imagine a builder doing the reverse, embedding magnetized nodules in strategic seams, turning the bastion into a stone battery, or at least a directional prank on invading surveyors. You chuckle at the thought. An enemy officer unrolls his map, the needle panics, and the fort wins a tiny psychological skirmish without firing a shot. Historians still argue whether Anomalous compass readings at certain sites are just geology and leftover iron, or evidence of intentional placement of magnetite-rich materials to create controlled magnetic fields. The phrase telluric currents tends to make sober scholars reach for tea, but you can't deny that people in every era experimented with unseen forces, static electricity parlor tricks, ley line hunting, even church builders aligning naves to the sunrise. Why not military engineers testing an invisible edge? You walk the bastion's lip slowly, letting the needle be your moody tour guide. At one corner, the spin stops and the compass behaves, right where the water channel beneath likely changes direction. You imagine current moving through stone-lined conduits, cool water conducting tiny charges, rocks seeded with iron minerals acting like a patchwork coil. It's a lot of maybe, more hypothesis than handbook, but the pattern is tempting. Acoustics that carry, hydraulics that breathe, magnetism that nudges. These fortresses might be multimodal machines disguised as walls, the way a violin looks like wood until it sings. Another mainstream anchor. By the late 18th century, artillery manuals advised separating powder magazines from heavy iron to reduce stray sparks and interference. Fort designers knew metal could be a liability and a tool. Meanwhile, navies were discovering that iron-hulled ships threw off compasses so badly they had to install correction magnets near the binnacle. The age understood magnetic mischief. So if you were a brilliant engineer in a star fort laboratory of angles and arcs, wouldn't you at least play with the field? You sit on the rampart, lay the compass beside you, and let your palm rest on the stone. Maybe it's your pulse. Maybe it's the night. You remember the courtyard's echo of banana pancakes forever, and you grin at your own ridiculousness. Acoustics, water, magnetism. What's next? A fortress that bakes breakfast? If it does, you're ordering extra syrup. You pull the compass back to center and try a slow experiment, counting under your breath. At the count of 8, the needle swings. At the count of 16, it settles. You reverse the rhythm. The swings change again, or you convince yourself they do. Confirmation bias loves a moonlit stage. You whisper, "Okay, maestro, if you're an instrument, play A." The fortress answers with a cricket and a distant drip. Tough crowd. Still, patterns persist. When you stand near the junction of two bastions, the needle steadies almost smugly, as if saying, "Here is the true line." At the bastion's midface, chaos. At the angle, order. You imagine surveyors staking out this geometry with a knowledge of magnetic lines, not just sight lines. It would be a delicious secret, a plan that hides its own compass, tuned to the site's minerals. The skeptic in you. Yes, you packed one. Reminds you that buried scrap, old rails, or even modern detritus can scramble a cheap compass. A soda, can in the dirt, can impersonate a magnetic mystery if you want it badly enough. You nod to your inner buzzkill and keep testing anyway, because curiosity is louder than caution, and besides, you've already risked your dignity whisper testing. An echo chamber about breakfast foods. That ship sailed back in Section 4. At last you pocket the compass and stand, letting the fortress be stone again. Whether the anomaly is geology, old iron, lightning, or the whisper of a lost design, the effect is real. Your sense of direction goes fuzzy here. And that, in a battle, matters. Confuse the enemy's maps, mislead their trenches, nudge their artillery a few degrees off, tiny errors that add up to survival. Maybe that's all this is, a practical edge. Or maybe it's part of the greater riddle that stitches acoustics, water, and magnetism into one quiet system. You brush dust from your hands and glance at the sky, the star points around you echoing. The star points above. North is wherever the fortress decides it is, at least for tonight. You smirk, half to yourself. If anyone asks, we didn't get lost. We got reoriented by cutting-edge stone. The wind approves with a small, satisfied hush. Asterisk, you run your palm across the wall. The surface unexpectedly smooth, like stone that's been burnished, polished, and sealed by more than mere centuries of weather. You expect crumbling mortar, flaking grit, maybe a little lichen. Instead, the block feels stubbornly intact, as though the fortress has been rejecting time itself. You tap it lightly, and the knock rings with a solidity that makes you shake your wrist. Whatever this material is, it doesn't behave like any ordinary sandstone. Mainstream fact. Roman concrete has baffled modern engineers for decades. Unlike our cement, which cracks and needs replacing every few decades, Roman harbor concrete actually grows stronger when exposed to seawater. Its secret? A self-healing reaction between volcanic ash and lime. If Rome's formulas could last millennia, it's not far-fetched to wonder whether fortress builders knew a similar trick. Some 17th century texts even mention mixing animal blood or milk into mortar for durability, though you'd rather not imagine medieval masons milking cows just to patch a wall. And yet, the fortress stones here don't look patched. They look sculpted. Fringe theorists insist that these bastions used geopolymers, early forms of artificial stone poured like concrete but hardened into something tougher than granite. It sounds sci-fi, but experiments today show you can indeed make stone-like composites without modern machinery. You crouch, rub a finger across the surface, and feel it too even, too precise. You joke softly. This isn't masonry, it's an early 3D print job. A quirky tidbit floats up from memory. Some forts in Eastern Europe were rumored to have fireproof walls, so resistant that cannonballs supposedly bounced off like rubber bullets. Soldiers swore they saw sparks, but no damage. Skeptics argue the accounts were exaggerated, battlefield bravado mixed with gunpowder smoke. Still, as you look at the wall unscarred by centuries, you wonder if maybe, just maybe, those soldiers weren't bragging. They were baffled. Historians still argue whether fortress walls owe their longevity to clever material science or sheer overbuilding. After all, many of these bastions are 30 feet thick. Stack enough rock and you can shrug off half a millennium of weather. But thickness alone doesn't explain the smoothness, the resistance to cracking, the strange way moss clings but doesn't penetrate. Some visitors report that fortress walls almost repel roots and moisture. Unlike normal ruins where plants devour the cracks, you lean in, cheek against the cold stone, and for a ridiculous second imagine it humming back at you. Not the bass thrum of magnetism you felt earlier, something subtler, like a quiet refusal. You whisper, "You don't age, do you?" The fortress stays mute, though you can swear the walls' chill feels smug. Walking along the rampart, you notice seams where blocks meet. The lines are razor-thin, too precise for chisels dulled by hand labor. You recall the Inca walls at Sacsayhuaman, those polygonal puzzles where blocks fit so tight a knife blade can't slip through. Some scholars explain it as thousands of man-hours of patient stonework. Others suggest lost techniques, advanced tooling, even heat-softening stone. You shake your head, amused. If someone had a medieval microwave for boulders, they kept it a very good secret. Still, the uncanny craftsmanship keeps staring back at you. No mortar spills out, no crude patches of repair, just clean interlocking faces. You picture engineers in the 1500s standing around with wooden mallets, arguing about cannon angles, and then casually producing flawless stone seams. It's enough to make you mutter. Either they were geniuses, or someone left them a manual we never found. Hey, breeze drags your eyes upward, where the bastion's corner juts like a blade into the night. Moonlight slides across its surface, and for a heartbeat you think you see faint geometric patterns, like the wall itself has etched lines. They vanish when you blink, leaving you unsure if it was shadow or something carved too shallow to survive. Centuries. You laugh softly at yourself. Sure, hidden tech graffiti. Why not? But the fortress keeps resisting time, and you can't shake the sense that its durability is an accident. Maybe it's chemistry, maybe it's lost craftsmanship, maybe it's just layers upon layers of obsessive engineering. Whatever the case, the fortress stands as though built last week. And in a way, it makes you jealous. The Wi-Fi router in your apartment barely lasts 3 years. You pat the wall one last time, as if congratulating it. The stone doesn't flinch. It's you who steps back, realizing you've been caught admiring. Resilience like it's a magic trick. And maybe, just maybe, it is. Asterisk. The night sky stretches wider as you climb one of the bastions, and suddenly the geometry around you stops feeling random. You pause, glance upward, and realize the fortress itself is mimicking the heavens. Each point of the star lines up suspiciously, with constellations above, Orion's belt stretching just so, the North Star hugging the wall's axis, a faint sweep of the Milky Way framed between two bastion tips. You tilt your head, squint, and mutter, well, that's either a cosmic coincidence or the best city planner ever. Mainstream fact: many ancient and early modern structures were deliberately aligned with the sky. Stonehenge is the obvious example, its stones marking solstices like a giant calendar. Egyptian pyramids famously line up with Orion's belt. Even medieval cathedrals were sometimes oriented so dawn light struck the altar on particular feast days. Builders cared about the heavens, not just the earth. And here, in a military star fortress, you're starting to suspect the same thing. Fringe researchers argue that these forts doubled as astronomical instruments. Their long walls and sharp points weren't only for defense. They were sight lines, cosmic rulers for measuring the sky. The fact that so many forts share near-perfect cardinal alignment feels like more than accident. Standing here, compass still in your pocket, you realize the walls are already pointing you toward north, east, south, and west, like the Earth itself drafted the blueprint. You laugh under your breath. Imagine soldiers using the bastion to check. Horoscopes, Sergeant, Mars is in retrograde. Better delay the cannon fire. It's absurd. Yet the geometry insists on some dialogue with the stars. That a quirky detail. The fortress of Palmanova in Italy isn't just a military design. It's a perfect nine-pointed star radiating outward in fractal layers. From above, it looks like a mandala, more than a fort. Tourists say it feels less like walking into a garrison and more like stepping into sacred geometry. Historians still argue whether its design was purely military or partly symbolic, tying city and cosmos into one seamless plan. You imagine being a villager there, buying bread in the market, completely unaware you're living inside an astronomical diagram. As you stroll across the rampart, the night seems to sync with your footsteps. Every few paces, a star lines up, neatly between two walls. You stop, stare, and wonder if this fortress was once used to predict solstices, to track equinoxes, maybe even to calibrate calendars. You picture engineers in cloaks standing here at dawn, watching the sun rise exactly between two bastions and nodding like scientists confirming an experiment. Historians still argue whether aligning forts to the sky was practical navigation, ensuring compasses and maps agreed, or whether it was symbolic, even ritualistic. Some say it was just efficient surveying. Others suggest it was a way of embedding cosmic order into a war machine, making the fortress part of heaven's architecture. The debate lingers like a soft hum. Much like the fortress itself, you lean against a parapet, gazing at constellations mirrored by geometry below, and realize the fortress feels alive in both directions, grounded in stone, soaring in starlight. You whisper, so which came first, the star in the sky or the star on the ground? The silence that follows is neither confirming nor denying. The breeze carries the faint scent of damp stone and grass, and you smirk at your own wandering thoughts. First you had an acoustic megaphone, then a plumbing system that could shame, modern apartments, then magnetic pranks, and now a fortress doubling as an observatory. If it starts predicting eclipses, you'll need to charge admission. For now, though, you just stand there under the stars, the fortress wrapping around you like a second constellation etched into earth. Asterisk, you descend from the bastion, tugging your coat tighter as a draft creeps out of the stone like the building itself is exhaling. It isn't just the night chill. There's something peculiar about the way the fortress stores and releases heat. You slide your hand across a wall, cold where it should be warm, then suddenly warm where shade has ruled all day. The temperature seems to ignore logic. Mainstream fact: fortresses often used clever heating tricks. Thick masonry walls acted as insulators, keeping interiors cool in summer and warm in winter. Some even had hypocaust-style heating systems, a Roman idea carried forward, channels beneath the floors where warm air circulated. Archaeologists in Germany found examples of star forts with stoves built so efficiently that a single fire heated entire barracks. Efficiency wasn't just comfort. It kept soldiers alive through freezing campaigns. But here's where the story twists. You wander into a vaulted room and pause, because the air has a faint, radiant quality. Not stifling, not musty, almost cozy. You half joke, great, a medieval radiator still running centuries later. Your laugh bounces back, nervous. You rub your hands together, testing the air, and realize warmth clings here long after the fire pits died out. Fringe theorists claim some forts tapped into geothermal energy, natural vents disguised as chimneys, hot water channeled through cisterns. Others imagine radiant stone infused with minerals that absorb sunlight by day and leak it back at night, like ancient solar panels. Standing in the glow of an inexplicably warm wall, you admit, as wild as it sounds, it doesn't feel impossible. A quirky tidbit from legend. In a Polish fortress, villagers swore you could leave bread dough near certain walls and it would rise overnight, as though the stone itself baked. Rational minds say soldiers probably just stored dough near stoves. Still, picturing a wall as a passive bread oven makes you smile and hungry. Historians still argue whether the unusual thermal behavior of some forts was intentional design, clever accident, or simply the sheer thickness of walls storing daytime heat. Some dismiss the anomalies as thermal mass, physics, plain and boring. Others quietly note that measurements in a few sites don't match ordinary expectations. And that leaves you pacing in circles, palms pressed against alternating warm and cold patches, like you're petting a giant stone cat with mood swings. You pause, imagining soldiers stationed here centuries ago, grateful for a warm barack in winter, but never wondering why one wall felt alive with heat while another bit with frost. Maybe they didn't care. They had boots to dry, muskets to clean, lives to gamble on battle. But you, centuries later, have nothing to do but notice. And once you notice, the puzzle refuses to let go. You breathe deeply, watching mist curl from your lips. The air feels different here, balanced, steady, as if someone regulated it. Ventilation shafts? Clever engineering? Or a subtle energy system nobody ever wrote down? You smirk and mutter, cutting-edge HVAC, Tartarian edition. The fortress, predictably, doesn't answer. Just another draft, just another whisper. And yet, the warmth lingers, like a memory of fires never lit. You wander into a side passage and stop, because the air feels alive again. This time not with heat, but with vibration. You press your palm against the wall, expecting solid silence. Instead, there's the faintest tremor, as though the stone itself has a pulse. You tilt your head, half amused, half unnerved. Well, either this place is alive, you mutter softly, or I'm overdue for a snack. Mainstream fact, resonance isn't a new idea. Ancient theaters were tuned so actors' voices carried without amplification. Even bells and cathedrals rely on sympathetic vibration. In 19th century forts, some chambers were intentionally shaped to amplify gunshots or signals. Acoustics as technology is real, practical, and older than most of our gadgets. But here the sensation is different. You whisper a syllable, and the echo doesn't bounce, it shivers. The walls seem to swallow part of your sound and return it in a lower pitch, like a hidden bass line beneath your voice. Fringe researchers claim star forts contained resonance chambers, deliberate cavities designed not for storage, but for frequency. Some even speculate these chambers interacted with magnetic anomalies, water channels, and geometry to form a kind of giant instrument. You grin at the thought of a medieval DJ dropping beats with a whole fortress. That a quirky tidbit. In the fortress of Pamplona, locals once said certain vaults could make candles flicker without wind. Theories ranged from bad ventilation to low frequency vibration, what modern scientists call infrasound, capable of rattling objects and unsettling stomachs. Soldiers joked that ghosts were messing with their lanterns. You imagine a guard trembling at the sight of his flame dancing, unaware he was experiencing physics that could also drive whales crazy. Historians still argue whether odd vibrations in forts are architectural accidents or engineered features. Were they side effects of angled bastions and thick vaults? Or did someone deliberately carve cavities to tune frequencies like organ pipes? Scholars politely dismiss the second option, but as your fingertips buzz on the wall, you think the fortress isn't taking sides. It's just humming its own secret song. You lean closer, ear pressed to stone. The vibration intensifies when you breathe out slowly, almost syncing with your lungs. You try a silly hum, off-key, nasal, the kind of sound that would get you thrown out of choir. To your shock, the wall hums back, a faint resonance that makes your teeth tingle. You burst into a laugh that ricochets around the chamber. and suddenly you feel less like a trespasser and more like a duet partner. Of course, the skeptic in you steps forward, wagging a finger. Low-frequency echoes are normal. In enclosed chambers, the fortress isn't alive. You're just inside a sound box. Maybe so, but you can't ignore how deliberate the shape feels. The way the arches curve into perfect vaults, the way the walls seem tuned to a frequency you didn't ask for, but now can't unhear. You back away slowly, grin still plastered across your face, and whisper, "If this place drops a bass drop, I'm dancing." The fortress obliges only with another faint tremor, more lullaby than club beat. Walking out into the night again, you realize that you've stumbled across yet another layer of mystery. Acoustics that speak, water that breathes, magnetism that tricks, and stone that refuses to age. One by one, the fort is revealing pieces of a machine that might not have been military at all, but musical, cosmic, or something in between. The fortress feels more and more like an enormous puzzle box, and tonight you've decided to peek at its blueprints. You duck into a vaulted room where the walls are plastered with old diagrams, at least in your imagination. Lines etched into stone, faded sketches in dusty archives, all pointing to one undeniable truth. Whoever designed these fortresses was either a genius of geometry or someone holding knowledge centuries too early. Mainstream fact, surviving plans of star forts are breathtaking. Architects like Francesco di Giorgio Martini and later Sebastian Luprestre de Vauban drew layouts with near-computer-grade precision. Their plans show arcs, angles, and bastions calculated to within fractions of a degree, all by hand, with quills and compasses. These weren't doodles. They were military math at its sharpest. Some of Vauban's fortresses are still UNESCO World Heritage Sites today, praised for engineering perfection. And yet, as you trace imaginary lines on the fortress floor, with your boot, you feel like you're walking inside a CAD program centuries before AutoCAD. The geometry is too clean, too fractal, too digital. Fringe theorists leap on this, claiming the plans look like circuit boards, with bastions as nodes and moats as conductive lines. Was this geometry simply pragmatic, or was it encoding some greater system of information? A quirky tidbit. Some fortress maps, when rotated or mirrored, form intricate mandala-like patterns. Tourists who stumble upon these diagrams often mistake them for mystical art. In fact, some conspiracy forums insist the builders used sacred geometry manuals, blending math with esoteric symbolism. Whether that's true or not, the diagrams do have a hypnotic quality. You could lose hours staring at repeating star shapes. Historians still argue whether the sheer mathematical beauty of these designs is evidence of inspired genius or just necessity. After all, to maximize defensive fields of fire, the angles practically design themselves. But then again, necessity doesn't usually create diagrams that feel like art you'd hang above a meditation mat. The debate simmers in academic papers. While you're here actually standing in the geometry, letting it spin your thoughts, you kneel in the dirt and sketch with a fingertip. One bastion, another, lines converging, circles radiating outward. Suddenly, the whole fortress feels like a diagram you're trapped inside. A cosmic blueprint, drawn not just for cannons, but for some deeper alignment. You smirk, whispering, either this was designed by a Renaissance genius, or someone slipped them a USB stick. The fortress, of course, remains silent. But you swear the walls shift slightly in the corner of your eye, lines converging into patterns that fade when you blink. You laugh nervously. Blueprints or not, the place has a way of drafting you into its mystery. Asterisk. You pause beneath an arch where ivy knits the stones together like green thread through an old coat, and you listen, not for echoes this time, but for voices that don't belong to the present. The fortress feels thick with names no one remembers. A place whose biography has been smudged so many times that the author might as well have vanished. The locals have a story for that. The builders came from the north and the east, they say, speaking a clipped language and measuring land with cords and brass mirrors. They stayed long enough to raise these star-angled walls, then folded their tents and drifted away at dawn, leaving no graves, no guild marks, just geometry. People call them Tartarian engineers, half with a wink, half with the hush you use at a shrine. You press your palm to the stone and imagine the last of them glancing back once, as if making sure the fortress would keep its own secrets after they were gone. Mainstream fact slips in, steady as mortar. Early modern Europe did have roving masters of fortification, engineers trained in Italy, the Low Countries, and later in France under Vauban, who moved from city to city building bastions as if stamping a signature across the continent. Many were employed by rival crowns in rapid succession. A designer might strengthen one duke's wall in spring and outline another prince's redoubt by autumn. Wars, treaties, and dynastic marriages shuffled borders so often that credit muddied. A fortress built by the French might, within a generation, be claimed as ours by a completely different flag. No wonder the authorship went wobbly. You run a finger across a chiseled mark, a faint star, or maybe just a mason's tally, and think about how much of history is just paperwork that lost a fight with rain. The legend says Tartarian crews left no marks because they did not want to be found, but you suspect the simpler explanation. Limewash, renovations, and a few centuries of polite civic makeovers will erase almost anything. If a future archaeologist tried to reconstruct your apartment lease from your recycling bin, they'd probably give up around the pizza boxes. Still, the stories persist. A quirky tidbit you heard in a tavern near another star fortress won't leave you alone. The elders claimed their great-great-something saw men testing the wall at night with singing stones. Flat lozenges of polished rock struck gently and held to the masonry. If the pitch rose true, the bastion was tuned. If it fell dull, they scraped and repacked mortar, then tested again. Like a lute, the legend says, only big enough for an army. You smile at the image of robed engineers pacing the ramparts, plinking the walls like a giant medieval guitar, and for a silly second you wonder if anyone ever played an actual song just to see if the fortress could carry a melody. If they did, you hope it wasn't Banana Pancakes Forever. The acoustics would never forgive you. You move through a caponier where the air cools your cheeks, and your breath turns to a thin fog that drifts toward arrow slits. The corridor opens onto a sally port, and there, on the threshold, you feel a tug, not physical, more like the gentle pull of a story wanting to be told. The tale says a caravan of surveyors arrived in a single night, set up brass tripods and folding tables, and traced the ground with chalk. They spoke little, ate less, and worked by starlight. On the fourth dawn, the chalk had become stakes, the stakes trenches, the trenches angled walls. The paymaster found their tent empty on the seventh day, coins untouched, a note pinned to the canvas that read, "You'll need fewer cannons than you think." Contractors who finish early and refuse the money. Now that is advanced technology. You pocket the smile and keep walking. Historians still argue whether these legends of anonymous masters are just a romantic varnish on the very real history of itinerant engineers, or whether there truly were schools and lineages that operated outside recorded guilds, the kind that passed knowledge as a discipline rather than a diploma, disappearing before politics could fossilize them. In the official archives you'll find names enough: Martini, Speckle, Cohorn, Vauban. Yet on the stones themselves you often find only directions. This way the bastion faces, this way the moat turns, this way the wind sings. People name people. Geometry names itself. There's another story, whispered by guides who like a good tip. Some forts were inherited rather than built. A garrison would arrive to find earthworks already shaped like a star, rumors saying the foundation belonged to an older regime or an older something. The soldiers did what soldiers always do. They used what worked. They widened ditches, raised parapets, filed new paperwork, and swore the place was theirs. Over time, the origin fogged. Was the outline sketched by Renaissance pencil or the ghost of a ground plan older than the flag that flew above it? The answer, politely, declined to comment. You stoop to examine small wedge marks near ground level, the kind masons carve to lever blocks. Some are fresh, some are ghosts. The fresh ones belong to restorers from the last century. Municipalities love a tidy ruin. The ghost marks, those could be anything. You imagine a crew in stiff coats and leather aprons, swinging wooden mallets, and humming a counting song in a language that slipped out of Europe's conversation 3 wars ago. Maybe that's all Tartaria is, you think. The memory of languages the map forgot how to pronounce. Another mainstream anchor steadies you. Military labor was not mysterious at all. It was brutally ordinary. Drafted peasants shoveled dirt, soldiers hauled gabions. Artisans laid brick until their hands learned the shape of 500,000 edges. Where the legend demands a vanishing guild, the payroll lists show names and rations. Fortresses rise not only on genius, but on bread, salt, and stubbornness. You stand in a doorway and breathe that in. The sweat of those who built so others could sleep behind angles. Yet even the ledgers leave gaps. Borders shift, archives burn, engineers die without heirs. Jealousy edits the margins. When the citation trail snaps, myth threads the ends together, and soon the builder who simply moved on becomes the builder who vanished. It's human, you think, to turn competence into magic once enough calendars pass between us and the work. We call a clean solution mysterious when we don't know the recipe. We call an anonymous team legendary when the name's war off. You lean on the parapet and watch the moat, black as lacquer, hold a perfect star-shaped mirror under the fortress. To the left, a field mouse scurries along the coping stones, tail sketching question marks in dust. To the right, a bat dips, tiny and precise, like a moving glyph. Legends survive because they behave like this place. They angle, reflect, and reappear from different vantage points. From one side, you see Swedish engineers, from another, French. Shift your stance, and the silhouette says Tartar as easily as Dutch. The outline is the constant. The attributions are the weather. You make yourself a quiet promise to enjoy both. The provable history with its ration lists and construction orders, and the rumors with their singing stones and early departures at dawn. Between the two, a fortress keeps its poise. If Tartarian engineers were real, perhaps what defined them wasn't a passport, but an attitude. Build as if the sky were watching, leave before the politics arrive, and design so well that centuries later someone will feel compelled to whisper to the walls that a breeze lifts the ivy and lays it down again. You push off the parapet, smile to no one, and mutter a last small joke to keep the night friendly. If the builders are hiding, it's only because they saw me coming with follow-up questions. The fortress, neutral as ever, answers with a single drip in a distant corridor, the kind of punctuation that turns a legend into a lullaby. You follow the drip into the silence and realize what's louder than water, the absence of a story. The fortress keeps its walls intact, its bastions sharp, its moats still catching moonlight, but the books that should explain it fall silent. You leaf through the library in your mind. Medieval chronicles detail feasts, plagues, and kings' bad tempers in glorious excess. Yet when it comes to certain fortresses, when it comes to certain empires, you find missing chapters. A gap where whole lines of history should be. You smirk, whispering, "Well, that's convenient. The dog didn't eat the homework. History did." Mainstream fact: archives are notoriously incomplete. Wars destroy libraries, fires devour manuscripts, regimes rewrite chronicles to flatter themselves. Napoleon's campaigns burned more than villages, they burned records. Even World War II bombings leveled archives in Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands, leaving centuries of papers as smoke. Erasure isn't always conspiracy. It's just entropy with better PR, but the scale here nags. Fringe researchers point to Tartaria, a supposed empire wiped from maps. Star forts pop up across continents, they say, yet textbooks treat them like scattered coincidences with no mention of a centralized culture. You trace your hand along the wall and think, if the geometry is the same in India, Italy, and Africa, why don't the textbooks mention a shared blueprint? Historians still argue whether that's because such a blueprint never existed, or because acknowledging it would mean admitting a culture slipped through our official net. That a quirky tidbit. In some 19th century schoolbooks, faint references to Tartary linger. Children learned it was a vast region stretching across Asia, undefined and mysterious. Then, somewhere around the early 20th century, the term faded. Geography absorbed it, history ignored it, and soon the word sounded like a fairy tale. You chuckle softly. Imagine explaining to your teacher that you failed geography because the entire continent changed names. You wander toward the bastion tip, feeling how silence can be heavier than cannon fire. Maybe the real technology hidden here wasn't walls or waterworks. It was vanishing. To build something so massive, then erase its authors so thoroughly, takes more coordination than bricks and mortar. You imagine an empire's obituary being rewritten by the victors, leaving only stones too stubborn to lie. The wind shifts, brushing your cheek, and you mutter, "Funny how textbooks talk about every prince's shoe size, but not about this." The fortress offers no rebuttal, just a silence deep enough to feel deliberate. Asterisk, you pause at the bastion tip, toes against stone, and stare into the dark field beyond. It feels like you're standing at the edge of a debate instead of a wall. The fortress itself is evidence, solid, geometric, undeniable. But how you explain it depends entirely on what side of the campfire you sit. Mainstream fact: military historians attribute the Star Fort to clear, rational progress. Cannons appeared, castles failed, engineers adapted. From the late 15th century through the 18th, this design became the gold standard. Francis Vauban alone built or upgraded over 100 fortifications, and his notebooks read like physics lectures married to blueprints. Pragmatism, not prophecy, they argue. Then there's the fringe camp. They see circuit boards in the layouts, energy grids disguised as moats, and a cultural fingerprint, Tartaria, scrubbed out of polite history. To them, star forts are proof of advanced technology, deliberately forgotten or suppressed. You balance between these voices, the skeptic and the dreamer, both whispering in your ears like mischievous twins. A quirky tidbit. One symposium in the 1980s devolved into an argument so fierce that two historians nearly came to blows over whether a particular fortress in India was inspired by European engineers or designed independently. Imagine that, PhDs with fists raised, not over treasure but over triangles. You grin, picturing referees in powdered wigs separating them. Historians still argue whether the repeating star pattern across continents proves diffusion of a brilliant idea or just multiple cultures responding to the same problem of artillery. Did great minds think alike, or did a single lost manual travel farther than its authors? The fortress beneath your boots doesn't lean either way. It just waits. Solid, smug, content to watch academics duel. You rub your thumb along the parapet, amused at your own waffling. Part of you craves the clean answer, defense against cannons, end of story. Another part thrills at the thought of hidden engines, lost empires, and whispered erasures. Maybe both are true, maybe none. The fortress seems to enjoy your indecision. You chuckle softly, muttering, conspiracy or coincidence. Pick your bedtime story. And for once, the night feels kind enough to let both exist. Asterisk, twilight bleeds into full night as you circle back toward the fortress heart. The air has settled into that heavy quiet where even crickets hesitate, as if they too are waiting for the conclusion. You walk slowly, savoring the crunch of gravel underfoot, and let your hand skim along the stone one last time. The bastions stretch outward like frozen arms, and the moat glimmers with silver starlight, mirroring the cosmos above. The fortress is both sky and earth now, geometry suspended between them. You pass the echoing courtyard, remembering your absurd breakfast. Serenade and smile. You pass the underground stairs, recalling the labyrinth that breathed like a lung. You even pat your pocket where the compass sulked earlier, half expecting it to twitch again. Each puzzle piece still fits, but no picture has formed. Instead, the mystery is the picture. Mainstream fact reassures you with its sober tone. Star forts were real, practical, and indispensable for centuries of European warfare. They were studied, copied, and improved upon, and eventually outpaced by modern artillery. Nothing magical, just human adaptation. And yet, fringe whispers keep tugging. Lost materials that never erode, alignments with stars too neat to dismiss, acoustic tricks that feel tuned, and the silence in textbooks that leaves Tartaria as rumor instead of history. Historians still argue whether any of it points to hidden knowledge or just clever engineering amplified by imagination. You shrug, letting the arguments drift into the night. Because here, standing in moonlit geometry, you realize you don't need a verdict. The fortress has done its work, it made you wonder. And in a world obsessed with answers, wonder might be the rarest technology of all. You stop at the final bastion. The wind brushes your cheek with a softness that almost feels like a goodnight pat. You laugh quietly and murmur, "Fine, keep your secrets." The fortress hums back in silence, content to hold them. Asterisk and now, as the night deepens, let yourself slow with it. You've walked the bastions, traced the stones, listened to echoes that stretched farther than your voice. You've wondered about water that breathes, walls that refuse to age, and stars mirrored in motes. Whether those mysteries are solved or not doesn't matter anymore. What matters is the calm that lingers when you stop asking and simply rest inside the question. Breathe in. Feel how the fortress walls hold their strength around you. Solid, steady, older than worry. Breathe out. Let your shoulders unclench as the moat mirrors the stars. Still water, still sky, still heart. Each exhale smooths the stones a little more in your mind, sanding sharp edges into soft curves. The fortress, so cutting in daylight, becomes a cradle at night. You picture lying back against the cool wall, eyes half closed, hearing the faint hum of distant resonance. Not threatening, not puzzling, just a lullaby in stone. Even the compass needle, once frantic, is still now, pointing, only to rest. You don't need to follow it. You don't need direction here. You are safe in stillness. The air grows slower, the world quieter, and you can let go. Whatever secrets the fortress guards, they'll remain, safe and patient, waiting for another wanderer on another night. For you, tonight, there is only peace. So breathe once more, long and deep, and let yourself drift, like a leaf settling on the moat's dark mirror, like a star easing into its place in the sky. The journey is finished. The questions can sleep, and so can you.